Hey, stop scrolling for a second. Somewhere in a private estate outside Chicago, a woman made sure another woman's face was never seen by the man she was about to marry, because she couldn't stand how beautiful she was. She thought no one would ever notice. She thought she could control it forever. But one evening, the billionaire she was engaged to finally looked past the excuses, past the scarf, past the lowered eyes. And what he saw changed everything. I'm not going to tell you how it ends. Not yet. Just stay with me, because by the time this story is over, you might think twice about the people you've stopped noticing. Hi everyone, welcome back to the channel. Before we start, let me know where you're watching from today. Drop your country in the comments. I genuinely love reading them. Today's story is about jealousy, quiet cruelty, and a secret that stayed buried for years until it simply couldn't anymore. There's a twist near the end that I promise you won't expect, so get comfortable, because this one's going to sit with you for a while. She wasn't hiding. She was being hidden. Daniel Whitfield was 36 years old, and by every measure the world cared about, he had it all. He ran Whitfield Capital, a firm that quietly managed the fortunes of people who never had to think twice about money. His name showed up in business magazines he never asked to be featured in. And in 2 months, he was going to marry Camille Reyes, a woman so composed, so photogenic, so perfectly put together that people joked she must have been trained for the role since birth. Camille was 30. She came from a family name that still opened doors, even though the money behind it had quietly dried up years earlier, a fact she made sure almost no one knew. She had the kind of beauty that photographed well from every angle, a laugh that landed exactly when it needed to, and an instinct for saying whatever a room wanted to hear. Daniel had met her at a charity dinner nearly 2 years earlier. Within a year, there was a ring on her finger worth more than most people's homes. But there was someone else living in that house, someone whose name almost never came up, whose face Camille made very sure was rarely seen. Her name was Elena Marsh. She was 28, and she worked as the live-in housekeeper for the Whitfield estate. She'd been hired 8 months earlier, right around the time the engagement became public. Elena was quiet. She kept her head down, worked early mornings and late evenings, and almost never appeared when guests were around. That wasn't an accident. The first time Daniel actually saw Elena clearly, not just a shape moving through a hallway with a laundry basket, was on a quiet Sunday morning. He'd come downstairs earlier than usual, unable to sleep, and found her in the kitchen making tea, her hair loose instead of tied back the way it usually was. The morning light hit the window at just the right angle. Daniel paused in the doorway and, for a moment, simply forgot why he'd come down at all. Elena had a kind of beauty that didn't ask to be noticed. It wasn't the kind built from expensive treatments and perfect lighting. It was in the calm of her expression, the way she smiled to herself over nothing in particular. Daniel didn't say anything about it. He just said good morning, took his cup and went back upstairs. But that small moment stayed with him longer than he expected. He didn't think much of it at first. He was busy, closing deals, approving wedding plans, fielding calls from Camille's mother about seating charts and flower arrangements. Life moved fast for a man like Daniel. What he didn't know was that Camille had noticed something too, weeks before he had. She'd noticed the way a caterer glanced twice at Elena during a rehearsal dinner. She'd noticed a photographer accidentally catch Elena in the background of an engagement photo and mutter, almost without thinking, "Who is that? She's stunning." Camille smiled through it at the time. But that same night, she made a call to the staffing agency and gave very specific new instructions. From then on, Elena would only work early mornings and late evenings. She was never to be in any room where Daniel's business partners, friends, or family might be present. If there was an event, she was to stay out of sight in the staff quarters until it ended. Elena didn't fully understand why her schedule had changed so suddenly. She assumed it was simply how a house like this operated, full of rules she wasn't meant to question. She needed this job too much to ask why. Her younger brother back home was in college on a fragile scholarship, and the wages from this position, generous by any normal standard, were what kept things steady for her family. So she adjusted. She learned which hallways stayed empty. She learned which door to use. She learned to disappear inside a house that clearly didn't want her seen. What she didn't know was that the woman giving these instructions wasn't protecting the house's reputation. She was protecting her own reflection in Daniel's eyes. And what none of them knew yet, not Daniel, not Camille, not even Elena herself, was that Elena's presence in that house wasn't as random as it looked. There was a reason she had applied for this exact position, in this exact home, out of every household job in the city. She was looking for something, and she was running out of time to find it. 3 weeks passed, and Daniel found himself thinking about that quiet kitchen morning more often than he wanted to admit. It wasn't romantic longing. Not yet. It was something smaller and stranger. Curiosity. He noticed Elena was almost never around anymore. He asked the house manager once, casually, and was told her hours had simply been adjusted for efficiency. He accepted it, because he had no reason not to. Camille, meanwhile, was consumed with planning the engagement party, a lavish evening for 150 guests, complete with a live string quartet and a menu designed by a chef flown in for the occasion. In her mind, it was the most important night of the entire wedding season, the night the Whitfield name would officially merge with the Reyes name in front of everyone who mattered. She was not going to let anything or anyone pull attention away from her. 2 days before the party, Camille called Elena into the small office off the kitchen. "I need you on the back kitchen and the service hallway during the event," she said, not looking up from her tablet. "You will not come into the main hall. You will not come near the terrace. If a guest needs something, find another staff member to bring it to them. Understood?" Elena nodded quietly. "Yes, ma'am." "And, Elena." Camille finally looked up, her eyes moving over Elena's face, the way someone studies a threat they're trying to convince themselves isn't real. "Hair up, the plain uniform, not the fitted one." There was a beat of silence. Elena understood exactly what was happening, even though neither of them said it out loud. "Of course," she said, and left the room. That night, alone in the small staff apartment above the garage, Elena sat on the edge of her bed and let herself feel the weight of it just for a moment. She wasn't angry. She'd learned a long time ago that anger didn't change people like Camille. She was tired of being treated like something to hide, tired of being invisible in a house she cleaned with her own hands every single day. But she couldn't quit. Not yet. Not until she found what she'd come here for. On the night of the engagement party, the estate glowed with warm light, and the sound of violins drifted across the lawn. Elena stayed exactly where she was told, moving trays between the kitchen and the hallway, never stepping past the double doors into the main hall. Through the small window in the swinging door, she caught glimpses of Daniel laughing with guests, his tie slightly loosened as the night went on. He looked, at least, like a man doing everything right. Around 10 o'clock, disaster struck in the small, ordinary way disasters usually do. A tray of glasses shattered in the back hallway, and one of the younger servers panicked, unable to find clean replacements fast enough. The head caterer, overwhelmed, grabbed the nearest experienced staff member she could find. "Elena, we need extra hands, or Mrs. Reyes is going to have all our jobs." Elena hesitated. She knew the rule. But 150 guests were waiting, and a woman's entire night was about to fall apart over broken glasses. She picked up a tray and walked through the double doors, keeping her head down, moving carefully along the edge of the room, refilling glasses without meeting anyone's eyes. For almost 10 minutes it worked. No one noticed her. She was nearly back to the kitchen when a man's voice, warm, unmistakably familiar, said her name. Elena turned. Daniel was standing there, a glass loose in his hand, looking at her with the same expression he'd had that quiet morning in the kitchen, like he was seeing something he hadn't expected and couldn't quite look away from. "I didn't know you were working tonight," he said. "I wasn't supposed to be, sir. There was an emergency with the glassware." She kept her eyes low, professional, careful. "You don't have to call me sir." Before she could answer, a hand landed firmly on her shoulder. Camille had crossed the room faster than either of them realized. "Elena, sweetheart, the kitchen needs you," she said, her voice smooth as silk and just as sharp underneath. "Right away." Elena excused herself immediately and disappeared back through the double doors. Daniel watched her go, and for the first time in nearly 2 years, he looked at his fiancée the way you look at someone when a small crack has just appeared in something you thought was solid. "Why does she call me sir but barely look at me unless she has to?" he asked Camille quietly. "Why is she never around?" Camille laughed lightly and looped her arm through his. Darling, she's just shy. Some people don't like attention. Now come on. The mayor's wife wants to say hello. Daniel let it go. But the crack didn't close. It stayed there, quietly widening until 3 days later, when Daniel found a small worn notebook that had slipped out of Elena's coat pocket in the laundry room, and made the mistake of opening it to see who it belonged to. What he read inside would change everything. He wasn't supposed to open that notebook, but once he did, he couldn't stop. It was small, the edges soft from years of handling, the kind of notebook someone carries for a long time and refuses to replace. He told himself he was only checking for a name so he could return it, but the first page had no name. Just a date from years earlier and a single line in careful handwriting. Dad always said the Whitfields were good people. I have to know if that's still true. Daniel's stomach tightened. He kept reading, standing alone in the laundry room with the hum of the dryer behind him, and page by page, a story unfolded that he never expected to find inside his own house. Elena's father, Robert Marsh, had been a structural engineer. Years earlier, he had worked on a commercial project for Whitfield Capital, a development that Daniel's father, James Whitfield, had personally overseen before handing the company to Daniel. During that project, Robert discovered a serious flaw in the building's foundation plans, one that could have collapsed under the wrong conditions and killed workers on site. He reported it immediately, at real risk to his job, since fixing it meant months of delay and a significant cost. James Whitfield had listened. He fixed it, covered the delay out of his own pocket rather than cutting corners, and personally thanked Robert Marsh for saving lives that would never even know his name. The two men stayed in touch for years afterward, not as business partners, but as something closer to friends. James had even given Robert a small engraved compass as a thank you gift, inscribed with the words, "For the man who sees what others miss." Then, a few years before this story, Robert Marsh died suddenly, leaving behind medical debt and very little else. James Whitfield had passed away 8 months earlier, before Elena ever had the chance to properly thank him. And before Daniel even knew any of this history existed, the notebook explained everything. Elena hadn't taken this job by accident. She'd applied specifically to the Whitfield house because it was the last connection she had to her father's memory, and because somewhere in that family history she believed there might be an answer to something that had haunted her for years. Her father's compass, the one gift that meant more to him than anything else he owned, had gone missing after his death. Elena had always suspected, based on an old letter, that James Whitfield might have kept the matching half, because the compass had, in fact, been a set made for two men who had once saved each other's futures. She wasn't there for money. She wasn't there to be noticed. She was quietly searching for the last piece of her father's story, working in near invisibility, because that was simply how the house had arranged her, and because she never meant for her presence to be about anything other than the work she was hired to do. Daniel sat down slowly on the laundry room bench, the notebook open in his hands, and felt something in his chest shift completely. He thought about his father, a man who rarely spoke about sentiment, but who had once shown him a small compass in a drawer and said only, "This belonged to someone who mattered." Daniel had never asked more. Now he understood why his father never got rid of it. He went straight to his father's old study, untouched since James's passing, and searched the drawers until he found it. A small brass compass, slightly tarnished, inscribed on the back. "For the man who trusted me when it mattered." It was the matching half. Daniel sat there a long time, holding both pieces of a story that had been quietly running underneath his own life without him ever knowing it. And that was when the harder truth hit him. Camille had known, not the full story perhaps, but she had absolutely known Elena was beautiful, known there was something about her that unsettled her, and had spent months systematically hiding a grieving woman's face and voice from an entire social world, simply to protect her own image. She hadn't just been petty. She had been cruel, quietly and consistently, in 100 small decisions nobody else had noticed. Daniel closed the notebook, held both halves of the compass in his palm, and walked out of that study with a clarity he hadn't felt in 2 years. He needed to talk to Elena that night. But when he went looking for her, the staff apartment above the garage was empty. Her bag was gone. On the kitchen counter, in the same careful handwriting from the notebook, was a short note. "Sorry, I should never have taken this job under false pretenses. Thank you for everything. Elena." She was gone, and Daniel had no idea where to even begin looking. Elena had left before dawn, taking an early bus back toward her hometown with barely more than the bag she'd arrived with 8 months earlier. She'd overheard a hushed conversation the night before between 2 staff members about someone going through her things in the laundry room, and a fear of being exposed, of being seen as someone who'd taken this job under a hidden motive, overwhelmed her before she could think clearly. She told herself she was protecting her father's memory from being twisted into something it wasn't. In truth, she was running from the terrifying possibility of finally being seen and being rejected for it. Daniel spent the next 2 days doing something he hadn't done in years. He stopped everything. He canceled meetings. He let calls go unanswered. He hired a private investigator, not to dig up anything damaging, just to find an address, since the staffing agency had almost nothing current on file. Camille noticed his distraction and asked what was wrong. For the first time in their entire relationship, Daniel didn't lie to her. "I know what you did," he said simply. "I know why Elena was always hidden away. I know about the schedule, the uniform, all of it." Camille's composed expression faltered for just a second before she recovered it. "Daniel, she's the housekeeper. I was just maintaining professional boundaries. She's the daughter of the man who saved this company before either of us was old enough to understand what that meant," Daniel said quietly. "My father owed her family a debt he never got to repay. And you hid her like she was something shameful because you couldn't stand that she was more beautiful than you." The silence that followed was the loudest thing either of them had ever heard. Camille didn't deny it. She simply straightened her shoulders and said, in a voice finally stripped of its performance, "So what now? You're going to throw away everything we've built over some maid?" "I'm going to find her," Daniel said, "because my father would have. And because it's the right thing to do, whether or not it changes anything between her and me." He found her 3 days later, in a small rented house on the edge of her hometown, sitting on the porch steps beside her mother's wheelchair, helping her sip tea in the afternoon sun. When Elena saw him step out of the car, she nearly dropped the cup. "Mr. Whitfield." "Daniel, please." He held out his hand, and in his palm sat both halves of the compass, fitted together for the first time in over a decade. Elena's breath caught, her eyes filling instantly with tears she hadn't let herself cry in years. "My father kept his half in a drawer for 15 years, Daniel said. "He never explained why it mattered so much. Now I understand." Elena took the compass with trembling hands, turning it over to see both inscriptions joined at last. 2 men, 2 acts of trust, completed across time by their children. "I didn't come to your house for this," she said quietly. "I came because I needed to know if the story my father told me was true, that there were still people who did the right thing, even when it cost them something." "There were," Daniel said, "and there still are. I'd like to be one of them, if you'll let me try." He told her everything. About the notebook, about Camille, about the schedule changes, and the hidden face, and the months of quiet cruelty she'd endured without ever once complaining. Elena listened with the same steady composure she'd carried through every difficult month in that house, but something in her finally softened, like a held breath released after years of holding it in. "I'm not asking you to come back and work in that house," Daniel said. "I'm asking if you'd let me actually know you, not as staff, not as a secret someone tried to hide. Just as yourself." For a long moment, Elena said nothing at all, looking out at the quiet street, the compass warm in her hand. Some endings don't arrive with fireworks, they arrive quietly, the way truth usually does. Elena didn't say yes that day. She told Daniel she needed time. Time to grieve properly for the version of this discovery she'd imagined for years. Time to trust that this wasn't guilt dressed up as kindness. Time to simply breathe without being hidden or managed by someone else's decisions. Daniel respected that, without pushing. He returned home and ended his engagement to Camille within the week, quietly, without a public scandal, simply telling her the truth, that he couldn't spend his life with someone who had treated another human being with that kind of cruelty for the sake of appearances. Camille left the estate before the story could reach anyone outside that house, and no one ever fully knew why the engagement had ended. Over the following months, Daniel visited more than his assistant thought was reasonable for a man running a multi-billion-dollar firm. He didn't bring gifts that felt like bribes. He brought groceries. He fixed a leaking pipe under Elena's mother's kitchen sink with his own 2 hands, badly, laughing at himself the whole time. He sat on that porch and listened to stories about Robert Marsh, about the man who saw what others missed, about a daughter who had spent years afraid that kindness like her father's no longer existed in the world. Slowly, carefully, Elena let herself be seen, not just by Daniel, but by herself. She stopped lowering her eyes in rooms. She stopped assuming she needed to shrink to make space for someone else's comfort. When she eventually did return, it wasn't as a housekeeper. Daniel had quietly established a scholarship fund in Robert Marsh's name, supporting engineers who reported safety concerns at real professional risk, and he asked Elena, who had grown up watching her father's integrity up close, to help run it. It gave her work that honored her father's memory, instead of hiding her own light inside someone else's house. 2 years later, at a small gathering that looked nothing like the lavish engagement party this story began with, Daniel and Elena were married in the backyard of that same house. Elena's mother watching from her wheelchair, tears streaming down her face. Elena wore her hair down. No one told her to hide anything. No one ever would again. Here's what this story really asks of us. It's easy, in a world so obsessed with appearances and status, to believe that beauty is something to compete over, that worth is measured by how much attention a room gives you. But real beauty, the kind that actually matters, is the beauty of a woman who kept working with dignity even while being hidden. It's the beauty of a man who chose truth over comfort when it would have been easier to look away. And it's the beauty of a father's simple act of honesty, years earlier, quietly rippling forward into 2 lives he never lived to see collide. Sometimes the people we try hardest to hide are the ones who deserve to be seen the most, and sometimes the truth we're most afraid of finding is the very thing that finally sets us free. If this story touched something in you today, I'd love for you to hit that like button. It truly helps this channel grow. If you haven't already, please subscribe, because we share stories just like this one every single week. And if someone in your life needs a reminder that kindness and integrity still matter, please share this with them. Thank you for staying with me until the very end. I'll see you in the next one.